We are at the last day of the month of February, the last Sunday of the month of February, and we may well be in the last lesson in the Life of David series. We have been doing that for 14 months now, and we are at the end of the book of 2 Samuel. And we have other materials, I realize. You can look over into the Chronicles and you can find some other things about David. But our original intent was to look at 1st and 2nd Samuel. And so if you look at the beginning of chapter 21, 22, 23, 24 of 2 Samuel, move into the beginning of 1 Kings chapters 1 and 2, you find the end story of David's life. And one of the things you notice is that David is getting older. He's growing old as we get into this last section of material. In fact, one of the stories is that David is out for battle one day. And he has gone with his men against his enemies that have been his enemies for all of his kingdom time, the Philistines. And apparently David goes through a near-death experience. And his soldiers say to him, never again will you go out into battle because you are too valuable and it would be too great a loss. Never again are you to go to battle. Now, I wonder this morning how that felt to David. Have you ever heard these statements about growing old? Like, growing old is not for the faint-hearted. Have you ever heard that? Or it takes a lot of courage to grow old. Or it's really hard to grow old because things don't work like they used to work with this body, and you don't hear as well as you used to hear, and you don't see as well as you used to see, and there are all kinds of pains that come, and our mobility is decreased. And I find myself thinking, I wonder if there's a time coming when my children will say to me, Dad, it's no more driving. Now, Donnie Power said that to me a long time ago, but he just gave me a little piece of paper to go with it, and I kept driving, okay? But will there come a time when they'll say to me, Dad, you can no longer drive because it's not safe for you and it's not safe for others, and I wonder how I'll hear that. David has to hear the words, you can no longer go out to battle. And someday my children may say, Dad, it's time for you to go to some kind of a facility. They'll take care of you better and all these kind of things. I wonder how I'll hear that. Because David is growing old. In fact, as you begin the book of 1 Kings, he's at the point in life he can't keep warm. Now, have you noticed that also? I'm already beginning to get the symptoms. I have to cover up when I get at night, especially when this cold weather's been here. But you walk into an older person's room, their house perhaps, it's already seems warm to you, and they have what? Have a blanket or two. And David lives during a time when they don't have central heat and air. He lives in a time where they don't have space heaters. So they find a young woman who's never been with a man, extremely beautiful, and she comes in and she tends to David, even to the point in his bed so as to only keep him warm. So as you end the story watching David get old, and you end this story watching David, as he says, go the way of his fathers. He dies. But even in these last years, while he's getting old, David continues to have a problem. So after Absalom leads his coup and fails, there's a man named Sheba, and Sheba will rise up and decide he wants to be king. But now David's learned his lesson, and the military leaders have learned their lesson, and they rise up so quickly and they eliminate Sheba. And then David has another son, the one in birth order right after Absalom. He decides he wants to be king. But God himself intervenes and says, no, Solomon will be the next king. The one born to David and of all people, Bathsheba. Interesting, isn't it? David even has troubles in his old age because of his own sin. Because of his own sin. I still remember a man years ago had such an influence on me because I didn't know anything about the Bible. I don't know Hebrew. I don't know Greek. I don't know anything. And I would call Norman, and Norman would come by my office, and I'd say, Norman, what did this mean? And he'd pull out his Greek new. He had taught himself to read. He'd say, I think this is what this means. But I remember Norman telling me more than once, I keep asking God to help me not to sin in my old age. David will sin in his old age. He has lots of trouble. But as I read those end chapters, as I read the story of the end of his life, what I began to see was the same things, the very same things that we have seen all his life occur. You remember how we started all this? We said David was a man according to what? Anybody remember? God's own heart. And we kept saying, wonder what that means. I wonder if you and I can become people after or according to God's own heart. And I think it's possible. For I see three things that I've seen from the very beginning of the story of David, all these last 14 months, right here at the end. And one is that David is always, when he learns of his own sin, when he finally figures out about his own sin, he is so quick to be brokenhearted in sorrow over his sin and to repent or beg God for forgiveness. Every single time. Because what David wants more than anything else in his entire life is to be right with God. That's what David wants. And so here he is as an old person, and for some reason he is incited. He is tempted to count his own people. He wants to know the number of soldiers. He wants to know the number of people. And God takes offense to that. And you may be wondering, how does God take offense to that? Well, I think all the way through David's life, God wanted to be the person upon whom David depended. I think God wanted to be recognized by David as the source of his strength, not the number of soldiers, not the number of people. And so here David is as an old man. And by the way, you're probably wondering, how old was he when he died? Almost everyone says 70 years of age, because he was 30 years old when he became king. He reigned for 40 years. He's 70 years old. Do you think, well, how can someone be so frail at 70 years of age? But they say that maybe 70 years of age back then is like 100 right now. And in his old age, he does this counting and then finds out that God is upset and finds out there's going to be punishment. And his heart melts with sorrow, and he stands up and takes responsibility and says, this is my fault. And maybe the Lord will have mercy upon us. He goes back to God. What he wants more than anything else is to be right with God, and he will not let sin stand in his way. Now, that's a pretty important thought. Because sometimes in this world, when you and I sin, it's comfortable. And we kind of like it. And we kind of try to hang on to it. And then we get embarrassed by it and we want to cover it up. But covered up sin is never going to be forgiven sin. And what David wants more than anything else is to be right with God. And so when he finds out there's sin, he's quick to make it right with God the best he can. There's a second thing about David. It's been there all along. We've seen it over and over again. But David is a man of character. Now, he's not perfect, right? He makes all kinds of mistakes, but he's a man of character, and he's a man of honor, and it's seen in a lot of ways, but it's best seen in the way that he treats people. David is a man of character as best seen in the way that he treats people. So there's this story tucked into these pages that lists David's 30 mighty men. I love to read about the mighty men. These are men of unusual character, valor, courage, and fighting skills. And in addition to the 30 mighty men, he has the three that are not named with the 30, and they have even more courage. They have even more valor. They have even greater fighting skills, and they do such a phenomenal job of doing these things that how can a man do? And they're back at the cave of Adullam. David's been there before, hasn't he? And they're hiding in the cave of Adullam, David and his soldiers, because the Philistines had built a garrison over at the little town of Bethlehem. Now that's David's hometown. And how David ever allowed the Philistines to gain a foothold at Bethlehem, I don't know. Don't know that story. It's not told us. But in that cave, as an older man, David is thirsty. He's really thirsty. And his mind begins to kind of wonder and think, as our minds always do, if I could just have some water from that well outside of Bethlehem. Now that well has been a part of his life since the days of his youth. Special water. Childhood water. Do you remember what happens? The three that are so mighty, they're not named with the mighty men. The three decide to go honor his desire. And they break through the Philistine lines. They break past that garrison. And they go to that well and they get the water and they carry the vessel of water back to David. Now, do you remember what David does? He pours out the water. Won't drink it. And he says to the three, how could I possibly drink the water that came to me at the potential cost of your own blood? This could have cost you your lives. I will not drink it. As thirsty as I am, I will not drink. We don't have many examples of leadership like that in our world today. In fact, what we have to the contrary are leaders leading our nation who are so greedy and selfish and so after what they want that they don't mind putting burdens on the people. But not David. David is a man of character as seen in the way that he treated people. Mind all of us this morning that God pays particularly close attention to how we treat other people. Go back and read the Proverbs in the Old Testament. Even read some of the old laws of Moses in the Old Testament. And begin to see how God pays attention to how we treat other people. And then look into the New Testament. Watch the life of Jesus and listen to some of the language. Do you know that God pays attention to how I treat people in my family? Do you know that God pays particular attention to how I treat neighbors? Even neighbors that may be undesirable neighbors? Do you know that God pays attention to how I treat strangers and how I treat people who are different from what I know? He pays attention to how I treat people who are different in the color of their skin, how I treat people who are different because maybe their skin is covered completely with tattoos, or maybe they're different because they have things pierced in their skin that I don't particularly like. Or maybe they're different in the way they view things religiously. Or maybe they're different in the way they view things politically. And God is paying particular attention to how Jesus is a great example. Rich or poor, they got treated the same. Powerful or a beggar, they got treated the same. Healthy or a leper, they got treated the same. David is a man of character. And I know character is seen in a lot of ways. It's seen in our business dealings. It's seen in how we conduct ourselves in a lot of different situations. But character is seen also in the way that we treat other people. And God pays attention. And David's a man of character who treats people right. Now here's the other thing about David. David believes and says what he believes, that every bit of his success in life is due to God and not due to himself. Stretch all the way back to the day before Goliath, when he was in the fields tending the sheep. And the success that he had back then, he attributed to God. Lion and bear, remember those stories, the lion and the bear? From all those months and months ago? God allowed me to defeat the lion and the bear. God allowed him to defeat Goliath. And all the way through to the very end, he is saying, it's all based on God. It's not me. So he carries with him this unusual humility that would be hard for someone like David to maintain. Because was he handsome? Yes, he's handsome. Is he a fighter? Yes, he's a fighter. Is he a good king? Yes, he's a good king. He has success on top of success, and not inclined is he to reach back and pat himself in the back and say, God's lucky to have me. That's what pride says, by the way. It may not say it verbally, but that's how pride acts. God's lucky to have me. David knew God made him. Listen to what he says in chapter 23, at the beginning of chapter 23. It begins by saying, these are the last words of David. Utterance of David, son of Jesse. The utterance of a man exalted by the Most High. Is this working? Can y'all hear this? Feels like I've lost you. The Spirit of the Lord spoke through me. His word was on my tongue. The God of Israel spoke. The God of Israel said to me, when one rules over the people in righteousness, when he rules in the fear of God, he is like the light of morning at sunrise on a cloudless day. Like the brightness after rain, the bright grass brings from the earth. If my house were not right with God, surely he would not have made with me an everlasting covenant, arranged and secured in every part. Surely he would not bring to fruition my salvation and grant me my ever desire. Who's getting the credit for everything in David's life as he's old and looking back? Who's getting the credit? God gets the credit, not David. And as he speaks to his son Solomon, and he's saying to Solomon, I'm about to go the way of this earth. I'm about to join my fathers. This is a father talking to a son. This is a king talking to the next king. He needs to give him all kinds of instructions on how to be a good king. And he'll give a little bit of that. But I want you to hear what he says to Solomon. I'm about to go to the way of this earth, so be strong, act like a man, and observe what the Lord your God requires. Walk in obedience to him. Keep his decrees and commands and his laws and regulations as written in the law of Moses. Do this so that you may prosper in all that you do and wherever you go. and so forth. Last words to the one who's going to become the next king. And he says, the secret will always be, Solomon, not the great wisdom that you'll get someday, not all the other things. The secret will be found in your relationship with God, following God. And so here is this man, David, who teaches us what it means to have a heart according to the heart of God. And the three things at the end are the things that I've seen all the way through. David is quick to repent because he will not let anything stand between him and God. And sin separates us from God. He wants to be right with God. I want to cultivate in my life a desire to be right with God to the point that it'll drive me to repent as soon as I learn about my own sin. And David is a man of character as seen in the way that he treats people, all people, different kinds of people. You can't please God and be ugly to people. And David is seen as a man who believes that God is the reason for every success he ever achieved on this earth. And he gave God the verbal credit for it. What a man. What a man. You know what? He doesn't even compare. He doesn't even compare to the man named Jesus Christ, the God who became a man. Doesn't even compare. Not even close. Jesus never had to repent once. He never sinned. But I will tell you the other part. Jesus treated every person as though they were special, as though they had meaning and purpose in this life. They could be lame, they could be blind, they could be sick, they could have leprosy, they could have demons inside of them. Open arms. Jesus treated people right. And I will tell you that Jesus never, ever, ever let the thought get past him. I am here to do the will of my Father, and everything that happens is because of my Father. And he tried to teach us to think the same way. It's not because of me. It's because of a gracious God who's chosen to work in my life.